day everybody. In this demo series, in last couple of videos, we saw development of web service and continuous integration and continuous deployment. In this demo, the integration testing, that is API or web service test, and testing, that is combination of user interface application and API test, will be presented. Integration testing. It is automated and tested using Postman. Here, all validation of developed web service test cases are validated using JavaScript. System testing. Here, end-to-end scenario in all involved applications such as developed web service, SFTP, hospital management system, insurance ERP application, and banking application are automated and tested. Here, edge test cases are automated. An edge test case is a scenario that falls outside normal procedures and on the boundaries of your operating framework. Here, both user interface application and web services or API are tested in combination. It is automated using Playwright. The Cucumber, Page Object Model, Aluru Report, Soft-Assertion are added upon the Playwright framework. In both Postman and Playwright, both positive and negative scenarios are automated. The developed web service have two endpoints, such as one for generating the PDF and another for creating invoice. In insurance ERP application and for fund transfer of invoice amount from insurance bank to hospital's bank account. Postman integration testing. These are the test case details. The first case is creating an invoice without name, creating a backdated invoice, creating a future dated invoice, creating a duplicate fund transfer, creating invoice and fund transfer, that is a valid transaction. So this is the test case details. Let me execute the test case. So this is the response. So these are the various validations done. All are parameterized. The base URL and payload is parameterized. Everything is validated. This is the second request. Let me execute. So this is the response. Similarly, here everything is validated and parameterized. I'm executing the first scenario and let us review the results. Here, name validation is failing. Let me execute the whole test suite. These are the test results. Invoice without name is failing due to name validation. Backdated invoice is failing due to mismatch in date. Future dated invoice is failing because of date validation. And duplicate bank transfer is failing due to the below mentioned assertions. Test. Automated using Playwright and Cucumber. Here, the SFTP directory and ERP data are cleared by automation test script before every execution. I am executing the individual scenarios first. Finally, all scenarios will be executed and results will be reviewed. Scenario: creating an invoice without invoice number and without PDF. And an invoice is created through API. It is validated in SFTP, ERP, and banking application. Let me execute the scenario. So this is hospital's account. Initial transaction ID is 418. This is insurance bank account. Initial transaction ID is 418. Now invoice will be created through API. Invoice is not created in SFTP directory and it is validated using automation test script. In the ERP application, an invoice should be created without invoice number and it will be valid. In ERP, an invoice without invoice number is created. In hospital's bank account, a credit transaction of ID 419 is created. In insurance bank account, the fund transfer of transaction ID 419 is created. Let us review the report. So creating an invoice through API, invoice number or voucher is null and validation is failing. In SFTP directory, file is not created, hence assertion is failing. ERP invoice is created without voucher number, hence the assertion is failing. Finally, there should not be a fund transfer in bank application as invoice number and PDF is not present, but there is a fund transfer from insurance company to hospital's bank account. Hence, these assertions are failing. A new transaction is created in hospital's bank account and a new transaction is created in insurance bank account. So creating an invoice without invoice name. Invoice will be created through API and these three validations will be performed. Let me execute the test case. So this is hospital's bank account, initial transaction ID is 419. So this is insurance company's bank account, initial transaction is 419. Now invoice will be created through API. Created invoice is reflecting in the SFTP directory and it is validated using automation test script. In the ERP application, invoice should be created without invoice name and this will be validated along with other invoice details. In ERP, invoice is created without the invoice name. In hospital's bank account, there is a credit transaction of ID 420. In insurance bank account, there is a fund transfer of transaction ID 420. Let us review the report. The report until file creation in SFTP directory is successful. The name details are not present in the invoice created in ERP, hence this assertion is failing. As there are no name details in the invoice, the fund transfer should not occur, but payment was made. Hence, these transactions are failing. A new transaction is created in hospital's account and a new transaction is created in insurance account. Next scenario, creating a duplicate bank fund transfer. Invoice will be created through API. It will be validated in SFTP, ERP, and banking application. A duplicate invoice will be created through API. It will be validated whether a duplicate invoice or invoice with duplicate suffix is created in SFTP directory. It will be validated whether duplicate invoice is created in ERP application. And finally, bank transactions will be validated. Let me execute the scenario. Hospital's initial transaction ID is 20. Insurance initial transaction ID is 20. Now invoice is created through API. So created invoice is reflecting in the SFTP directory and it will be validated by the automation test script. Now invoice will be created in the ERP application and all the invoice details will be validated by the automation test. So here invoice is created. In hospital's account, there is a credit transaction of transaction ID 421. In insurance account, there is a fund transfer of transaction ID 421. Now a duplicate invoice will be created in the SFTP directory. Whether a duplicate invoice is created or invoice with duplicate invoice is created is validated by the automation test script. Now in the ERP application, it will automation test script will validate whether any duplicate invoice is created. There are no duplicate invoice created in the SFTP as well as in the ERP. Hospital has a credit transaction of transaction ID 422. Insurance account has a fund transfer of transaction ID 422. Let us review the report. So this is the report. Invoice is created through API. It is validated in SFTP, ERP, and hospital and in a bank application. A duplicate invoice is created through API, and here a duplicate invoice is created in SFTP directory, such as invoice with the same name or suffix duplicate is created is validated and assertion is failing. Duplicate or no invoice is ERP invoice is created, hence this assertion is failing. For duplicate invoice creation, there is a fund transfer or payment twice, hence this assertion is failing. Twice there is a payment made, and these are the details. Next scenario, creating a backdated invoice. A backdated invoice will be created through API and it will be validated in the SFTP, ERP, and in banking application. Let me quickly execute the scenario. So, hospital's account initial transaction ID is 422. Insurance company's initial transaction ID is 422. Now, a backdated invoice will be created through API. An invoice PDF is created in the SFTP directory and it is validated by the automation test script. A backdated invoice should be created in the ERP application, and its details, um, all its details will be validated by the automation test script. So here, a backdated invoice is created. In hospital's account, there is a credit transaction of with transaction ID 423. In insurance account, there is a fund transfer with transaction ID 423. Let us review the report quickly. So until this step, all are passing. From here, it is failing. A backdated ERP invoice is created, hence it is failing. For the backdated invoice, there is a fund transfer or payment, hence these assertions are failing. Next scenario, creation of future dated invoice. Future dated invoice will be created through API and it will be validated in all involved applications. Let me quickly execute the scenario. Hospital's initial transaction ID is 423. Insurance bank account initial transaction ID is 423. A future dated invoice will be created through API. Created future created invoice is reflected in the SFTP directory and it will be validated by the automation test script. Now the future dated invoice should reflect in the ERP application and all its details will be validated. A future dated invoice created is reflecting in the ERP application. Hospital account has a credit transaction with transaction ID 424. Insurance account is having a fund transfer with transaction ID 424. Let us quickly review the report. This step is failing. A future dated ERP invoice is created, hence assertion is failing. For a future dated invoice, there is a fund transfer or payment which is not allowed. Hence, these assertions are failing. Scenario: creating only PDF invoice. Only PDF invoice is created through API and it is validated in uh, SFTP, ERP, and banking application. Let me quickly execute the scenario. Hospital has initial transaction ID of 424. Insurance bank account has initial transaction ID of 424. Only PDF invoice is created. The created invoice is reflecting in the SFTP directory. In the ERP application, uh, that should not be an invoice created, and it will be validated by the automation test script. In ERP application, there are no invoice created. In hospital's bank account, there is a credit transaction with ID 424. In insurance bank account, there is a fund transfer with transaction ID 424. Let us quickly review the report. An ERP invoice is not created, hence this assertion is failing. There is no invoice in ERP, but there is a fund transfer or payment made. Hence, these assertions are failing. New transaction is created in hospital's bank account and in insurance bank account. Next scenario: creating a valid transaction of invoice and fund transfer. Invoice will be created in hospital management system. It will be validated in SFTP, ERP, and bank applications. Let me quickly execute the scenario. Hospital has initial transaction ID of 424. Insurance bank account has initial transaction ID of 424. In hospital management system, logging in as a pharmacist, creating an invoice, reviewing the generated invoice. In SFTP directory, invoice is created, which will be validated by the automation test script. Now, in the ERP application, an invoice should be created and all its details will be validated. So, an invoice is created in ERP. In hospital bank account, there is a credit transaction with transaction ID 424. In insurance bank account, there is a fund transfer with transaction ID 425. So since this is a valid transaction, all test cases has been passed. This is an end-to-end transaction. This is the feature file and it contains all valid, invalid, business use case and edge test cases. The details are as follows. These are the details. I'm executing all the scenarios. Once the execution is complete, we will review the report. Let us review the generated Aluru report. Scenario: invoice without number and PDF. Here, while creating the invoice number is null and validation is failing. In SFTP directory, file is not created. In the created ERP invoice, the voucher number is not present. Finally, there should not be a fund transfer in bank application as invoice number and PDF is not present. Scenario: invoice without invoice name. The name details are not present in the invoice created in ERP. As there are no name details in the invoice, the fund transfer should not occur, but payment was made. Scenario: duplicate bank fund transfer. After duplicate invoice is created, duplicate invoice is not created in SFTP. Duplicate or no ERP invoice is created. For duplicate invoice creation, there is a fund transfer or payment twice. Scenario: backdated invoice. As backdated ERP invoice is created, for the backdated invoice, there is a fund transfer or payment. Future dated invoice. For future dated ERP invoice is created. For future dated invoice, there is a fund transfer of or payment which should not be allowed. Of only PDF invoice, an ERP invoice is not created. There is no ERP invoice, but there is a fund transfer or payment. This is a valid transaction, and hence it is passing. It is recommended to have validated and acknowledged contract between all involved application and good contract testing in place. Summary: advantages of using Playwright. Here, both web application and web services are tested in blend. The edge test cases, which are automated, examines the restriction of software application, revealing vulnerabilities that might not emerge under typical testing scenarios. This reveals the hidden flaws and strengths of the system. The Cucumber framework helps technical and non-technical team members understand the intended functionality, business requirement, and impact of the project. It is well suited for agile development process. It serves as a live documentation. By automating and testing business use cases, it clearly presents the benefit and risk and what impact it will have. Thanks for your time. Thanks for watching.